And here we go. A rather quick transition into a CAM health report. Back in 2013, I was doing two or three of these reports or episodes or what have you a day. Because I had a lot to say after my 2012 manic incident. And I would say that was largely comprised of what the experience of depression was like, and perhaps some subtle advice as to how to handle breakup scenarios with a person that is on a mood disorder spectrum. However, I would like to think that the scope of my mental health reports since then have become more worthwhile in terms of watching. Now, this installment here is a dovetail of sorts. I have reported in the mental health series about the problems I had with a staph infection. But I have managed to, outside of the hospital, bring the situation under complete control. So much so that while I did consider it a substantial risk, that I myself was a substantial risk to others and governed myself accordingly, the reality is the pneumonia symptoms never developed, really. And I had a strategy for that lined up naturally to deal with any sort of buildup of fluids on my lungs. For reasons that I have explained elsewhere, that tie into the endocrine system, most specifically the enteric nervous system. And if you go back and review this series, I go into some detail about that. Well, that's not really why I'm talking dovetailed, as it were, onto a most recent CAMH report. And that is because after passing through a prolonged period where my entire focus was on fixing my staph affliction, which by and large I have managed to do, I have entered into depression. There's no question. I decided this yesterday, that I had transitioned. I was no longer in a euthymic state. What does that mean? Well, in retrospect, it's a good thing, because I tend to enjoy life more when I'm depressed or mildly depressed than any other state. I'm calmer, I get more work done, I tend to be more methodical, and of course all of the experiences that go along with mania are not there. So you can exist very comfortably in a depressed state, be very productive, and go through your wild ideas and sort them out. Maybe there's something good somewhere. I'm talking about your mania, right? Sometimes you come up with grandiose concepts. That kind of level of ideation was never really a factor in any of my bipolar illnesses, I must admit. Grandiose thought? No, you could accuse me of that under normal circumstances. You didn't need to wait until I was in a manic state to say you're engaging in grandiose thoughts. Well, what about it? Let's just say some might call that an inside joke, but it is certainly true for an ordinary person to suddenly start talking about fantastical things. Not necessarily to people who could distinguish whether they were fantastical in a wonderful way or fantastical in an imaginary way. And it's the type of thing that is a positive feedback loop when you're manic and inexperienced with the illness. You will just bounce around, quite literally, as if you're on LSD, looking for meaning or wonder or anything else. And, some people become quite promiscuous while manic. This has never been an issue with me. Sorry. My legs are still healing, and I do have a lot of pain there, which goes along with the thing. Which is another thing that I should mention about my healing body, is although I'm depressed and no, I didn't crave sleep, it's a good thing when you're depressed and you really want to go for a long sleep. That means you're going into a nice depressive state. Much, much more pleasant than that state that I have described, where you go from mania, brief euthymia, into depression. And the depression has the same characteristics as the manic state in terms of insomnia, just for unaccountably different reasons. And the manifestation of the insomnia is not like jumping out of bed, say, when you're in energetic mania and burning off, huge amounts of calories. In the process, you're going very thin. No, it's not like it at all. You're probably sitting down, going through your records or documentation, scrapping useless stuff. So it's, packaging up parts of your life that you no longer want to be associated with. That's the type of thing that accompanies a manic depressive in depression with insomnia. On their hands, you just get out of bed and you do something. Now, I know there are people that, when they become depressed, they become bedridden, which is a truly unique thing. And I, of course, know that it exists, but it has never been a factor in my life. I have always, under every circumstance, including deep depression, gotten out of bed in the morning and done something. Rather than wallow, is that the word that you might use? You wallow in your depression? No. I never really got depressed about things, with one exception. I'd say I would just feel the depression and feel somewhat relieved, particularly if I had a bad bout of mania, that I could just take it at a slower pace under depression. So, having announced that to you and reminded you that despite the depression and the craving for sleep, I'm still stuck every 2 hours making sure that my legs are recovering properly, and they indeed are. This illness of mine is entirely now under the control of my body. And because of that, the wounds that are created as part of the body's healing process are drying up and forming scabs. It's a very good sign. And once the scabbing is completed, it would appear as if there will be no scarring whatsoever in the sites where the body created a point at which to emit fluids. Which of course I have discussed, but shall perhaps do in more of an organized way. But the one thing I can tell you again, and I have said this, is it is really bad practice to cover these wounds up. If you cut off an exit point that the body has created, it will just create another. So, general advice, perhaps a more detailed review, although I have done a fair bit about this foot problem, the problem with my lower limbs. So I might find myself repeating myself for the sake of making a more thorough examination of the subject. I may consider doing that because it's not entirely a mental health related issue. The staph infection gets into your body through an opportunistic point, which is to say you have a puncture wound or something like that. It could get into a scratch, I suppose, but that's most unlikely. No, it needs to be a bigger wound that the body cannot deal with so readily. And you create such a wound, and a staph infection is likely to follow because that is all over you. Staph. These types of things, they're on your skin all the time. And there's little you can do to get rid of it from your person. It's just a fact of life. And if you are deeply concerned about this, but I remind you, there's nothing you can do about it. You could try using medicated soaps. That's for me. I just use ordinary soap, even on my hair. I just wash it with soap. I just don't see the point in using shampoo. But I digress. Allow me to close. I'm confirming that I'm entering into a state of depression, and therefore quite likely the content of these CAMH episodes will shift as I attempt to bring a more specific explanatory purpose to each installment, which I think was the flavor of the involvement that I had with the subject back in 2013. There were brief videos on simple subjects and not these long-winded examples of hubris that I find myself doing now. But we shall see. Thank you for your attention. It's painful. And no, I do not have excellent mobility yet. I'm getting there.